It lays the predicate and the foundation for the development of a weather satellite that will permit man to determine the world's cloud layer and ultimately to control the weather, and he who controls the weather will control the world.
Geoengineering Wars and Atmospheric Governance from journals.law.harvard.edu. Question: does that study report from Harvard sound just a bit ominous? Geoengineering Wars and Atmospheric Governance? Yeah, what could go wrong? From the report, the increasingly harsh and unevenly distributed heat-related harms caused by climate change, no mention of the climate engineering weather warfare elephant in the equation, of course, together with frustration over the collective inability to respond to the crisis, are likely to make unilateral geoengineering efforts increasingly attractive. The Harvard report continues. Stratospheric aerosol injection, SAI, is a form of solar radiation modification that is effective, they say, technically feasible, and within the financial means of many states, and even non-state actors. Yet, the report states, there are virtually no global governance structures in place to specifically regulate such activity, and existing international law would provide only weak constraints on unilateral SAI efforts. These features create incentives for unilateral action in what is known as, quote, a free driver problem. Few constraints on a unilateral action. Stop there. First, about the claim of SAI, stratospheric aerosol injection, being effective. Question: effective for what? Covert weather warfare? Ozone layer destruction? Hydrological cycle disruption? Total biosphere contamination? What the Harvard report means, of course, is that SAI is effective at cooling the planet. Oops. Wrong again. SAI traps more heat than it deflects, and when all the negative downstream consequences are considered, SAI is supercharging the overall heating of the planet, not cooling it. Next, let's accurately define the so-called free driver problem. Summary: the money-printing criminal cabals that control governments, thus militaries, from the skies above, can dump whatever they want on whomever they want, anytime they want, with total impunity. That's how the entire system of the Matrix has been designed for decades. Not an accident. The Harvard EDU report continues, quote, there would be significant collateral environmental and climatic harms associated with SAI, a gross understatement, coupled with the high risk of unilateral action, a risk posed by any unilateral SAI effort. One that is underappreciated and under-theorized is that of armed conflict. Stop again. First, does any rationally thinking person actually believe the powers that shouldn't be would ask for our permission before fully implementing their crown jewel weapon of total control? Covert weather warfare? Quote, he who controls the weather controls the world. U.S. President Lyndon Baines Johnson, 1962. Yes, Mr. Johnson, perhaps true, until the planet's life support systems fail, after which no one gets out alive. And for those that still believe, even now, that those in control currently are less malevolent than LBJ, think again. They're just better actors. More from the Harvard report. Countries would likely perceive the potential risks associated with unilateral SAI efforts as constituting a threat to national security, and in the absence of adequate legal and institutional mechanisms to constrain such unilateral action, might well contemplate the use of force to defend against the perceived threat. Stop. Really? Could might consider force to combat weather warfare, which the Harvard report calls a, quote, perceived threat? So-called academia isn't capable of telling the truth at this point. Spraying extreme quantities of highly toxic climate manipulating elements into skies with the intent to inflict multiple layers of harm isn't a, quote, perceived threat. It is an all-out act of war, not just against other governments, but against every single human being and every single thread in the web of life. Question: how many examples of weather warfare victim countries do we need? Which is a matter of historical record, not speculation. Vietnam was hammered with Project Popeye, all the way back in the 1960s. Iran has sounded the alarm on film and on the record on the floor of the UN that NATO was cutting off the flow of rain to Iran. They're not guessing. Iran has sophisticated climate monitoring technology. They can easily identify climate engineering operations cutting off their rain. In fact, every single Middle East country that was named by the U.S. as targets immediately after the new Pearl Harbor event of 9/11 subsequently endured a once-in-a-thousand-year drought, destabilizing their food supplies, thus populations, thus the governments themselves. Just an astounding coincidence? Really? And for those still clinging desperately to the official lies about what really happened on 9/11, please wake up. Do some real research. Populations around the world are drowning in a sea of deception that has been rising for centuries and going exponential in recent decades. A final footnote on the events of 9/11, which are still impacting the world today, the so-called New Pearl Harbor. How many know that PNAC, Project for a New American Century, a Washington cabal of collaborators, including Dick Cheney, stated on the record a year before 9/11 that they needed a, quote, new Pearl Harbor event in order to accelerate their agendas and objectives in the Middle East? Just an amazing coincidence again. Really? How many Americans actually have any desire whatsoever to face the truth? Not just on that issue, but many others. Far worse is coming at blinding speed. You can quote me on that. Consider that foundational food chain factors are failing globally, from fisheries to farming to forestry. And power centers continue to clamor about commerce, the economy, and war. Welcome to the planetary asylum. And from the UK Telegraph, China says it's ready for war with America. The report states Beijing boosts defense spending by 7.2% and warns Washington that it is prepared to, quote, fight until the end. China has said it is ready for war with America as it raises defense spending and imposes retaliatory tariffs on U.S. imports. In a direct threat to Mr. Trump, China's representatives in America said, quote, if war is what the U.S. wants, be it a tariff war, a trade war, or any other type of war, we're ready to fight till the end, end quote. Let's add this from Bloomberg. Europe's defense budget rips through its climate crisis buffer. From that report, Europe's race to build a war economy has led the bloc to pull spending that was desperately needed for another crisis, the climate. Let's stop there. Just another glaring red flag of self-annihilating human insanity. Anyway, why worry about the planet's collapsing life support systems when you can instead expend the last remaining resources on waging endless wars until nothing is left? Literally. What a great idea. Of course, there has to be enough money left to build even bigger cruise ships and to expand Disney World. How could we possibly survive without either of those? Question, how much of the European resources are actually being spent on ever-expanding covert climate engineering operations, aka weather warfare, as the planet's life support systems collapse? And the same in the U.S. This is Dane Wigington. You're listening to the weekly installment of the commercial-free, non-political Global Alert News Report, the end of the world as we know it broadcast, brought to you by Geoengineeringwatch.org, the largest and most visited website in the world on the subject of climate engineering operations, aka weather warfare. Reaching a critical mass of awareness is the only way forward in this fight. We can and we must reach a critical mass of awareness by starting a conversation on climate engineering that leads people to a credible source of data. Geoengineeringwatch.org will continue all of our efforts to be the go-to source on covert climate engineering operations. A conversation on climate engineering can easily be started with Geoengineering Watch awareness-raising materials available on our homepage. We pass on our extremely high-quality printed materials for less than our cost of producing and shipping. Please help us to sound the alarm. Moving on, same theme. Life-threatening weather warnings issued across large swath of U.S. set for tornadoes and blizzards. That's from the UK Daily Mail. From the report, blizzard conditions are also expected in Arkansas, Colorado, Kansas, and Nebraska before the system moves east and takes aim at the upper Midwest. But the report states, temperatures should not hit the freezing mark during the winter storm. Wait, what? Temperatures won't get to freezing during the winter storm? What kind of winter storm does that? The chemical ice nucleation cloud seeding kind. But if and when they carry on this kind of operation long enough, surface temperatures can continue to drop precipitously to far below freezing, an extremely penetrating and unnatural feeling cold. Extensive ground fog often comes with this. Welcome to engineered winter weather. More from the Daily Mail report. They say, at the same time as the winter storm to the north, 3 states to the south are bracing for severe thunderstorms and possible tornadoes. Residents will see strong winds and ping-pong ball-sized hail. Up to 75-mile-per-hour winds are expected across the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Here's a summary of all that. Now, with engineered weather mayhem, they tell us it's perfectly normal to have a warm side to a, quote, winter storm, complete with thunderstorms and tornadoes, and as they are trying to cool it all down with chemical ice nucleation elements, there are those pesky extreme hailstorms. And eventually, with enough chemical ice nucleation cloud seeding and enough extreme surface zonal wind flows, some form of frozen material will fall from the sky, and now you're on the cold side of the so-called winter storm. What a circus of insanity. The weather terrorists are conducting chemical ice nucleation operations on almost every bit of moisture that is migrating into the U.S. from the Pacific, even causing frozen precipitation this week to fall in northern Baja Mexico, while regions of Alaska have no snow. Again, Greenland, Iceland, Siberia, Moscow, all above freezing temperatures in places of those regions with rain during the time it was a blizzard in New Orleans. And the so-called experts expect us to believe that that's normal. Let's keep going from AccuWeather. Strip of snow to extend from Colorado to Pennsylvania. The report states a band of snow along a nearly 2,000-mile-long zone from the Rockies to the central Appalachians. Wow. Right. Because that makes so much sense. A 2,000-mile-long band of snow, the chemically nucleated kind, fed with a flow of moisture straight out of the record-warm Gulf of Mexico. Yes, the Gulf of Mexico. That's been the name of that body of water for my entire life. I'm not changing it now. Continuing, Gulf of Mexico formed and fed so-called winter storms are becoming the norm because it makes so much sense to have blizzards in New Orleans and Florida, while again it was above freezing and raining at the same time in Alaska, Greenland, Iceland, Siberia, and Moscow. When did the climate engineering chemical winter operations really ramp up? Starting with the New Orleans blizzard, January 21st. Imagine that. Is there any significance to that date, or perhaps the day before that date? You decide. And by the way, to maximize the societal impact of winter weather warfare operations, their creations are now named. Geoengineering creations from this season. Winter storms for the 2024-2025 season. Winter Storm Anya, Blair, Cora, Demi, Enzo, Freya, Garnet, Harlow, Ileana, Jet, Kingston, and this week, Winter Storm Lola. Makes it much more sensational, doesn't it? At least Matrix Media thinks so, and their controllers as well. Moving on, there's more from CNN. Unusually powerful March storm threatens to create a blizzard, tornadoes, and fires as it crosses the U.S. Someone is definitely creating something. Let's stop there. And yes, there it is again. Blizzards, tornadoes, and firestorms all at once in the same borders. Because that's normal, right? Only in the planetary asylum. The CNN report continues. It's the first big test for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and its National Weather Service that staffing was slashed by the Trump administration. Cuts, scientists say, will have dangerous consequences for the safety of the American public, and around 800 employees were laid off across National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration last week. CNN then states the storm will get even stronger as it progresses, and it could reach near record strength for March, end quote. Did I mention ionosphere heater frequency transmission installations can and do manipulate atmospheric pressure zones? Is all this connected? You decide. About the fires, which are, at minimum, another consequence of engineered weather whack-a-mole. From theconversation.com, Carolina wildfires followed months of weather whiplash from drought to hurricane-fueled floods and back to drought. All that climate engineering that's so shockingly obvious in our skies couldn't have had anything to do with the beating that the Carolinas have had to endure, could it? Question, could the major lithium deposits in the Carolinas somehow be a part of this equation? Deposits under land that current landowners don't want to vacate in order for mining to commence? Again, you decide. More from MSN. Evacuations underway as more than 170 wildfires rage across multiple states. It's very unsettling. End of headline. That's their words, not mine. The MSN report continues. Abnormally high temperatures, dry conditions, and gusty winds fueled the fires and blankets of heavy smoke across the region. That's not doing much good for populations, is it? Lots of data about how bad smoke is for you now, especially when they're spraying above the smoke canopy with God knows what. Let's keep going. Also from MSN, U.S. is bracing for more dangerous hailstorms. Report says hailstorms in the United States are becoming more frequent and severe due to changing climate patterns, posing significant risks to homes, vehicles, and personal safety. They continue, as these destructive storms increase, experts warn that preparation is more critical than ever. Yes, just prepare for the worst. Softball-size hail. Never mind the climate engineering operations raging above the hail-producing clouds. Nothing to see here. Move along. The now constant chemical ice nucleation cloud seeding surface flash freezes are laying waste to what is left of the flora and the fauna. And if chemical ice nucleation doesn't get the job done, throw in another so-called polar vortex from the UK Guardian, who got their data from Severe Weather Europe. Weather Tracker. Polar vortex collapse could chill North America and Eurasia. Yes, more chemical cooldowns are planned before the coming summer from hell. For the record, during the same window of time, mid-March, NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, shows record warmth for the eastern U.S. Did someone not get the scheduled weather script? We'll soon find out. From MetDesk, sudden stratospheric warming event expected to develop in next 2 weeks and will probably weaken the jet stream. Question, is the term expected to develop the right term, or is scheduled to be manipulated more accurate? If you have not researched what ionosphere heaters are and what they can do, please take the time. These installations are covert weapons, nothing less. In regard to the planet's air conditioners, the polar regions, they're broken and getting worse by the day. And yes, climate engineering, in the attempt to hide the polar meltdowns from the public for as long as possible, is only making it worse overall for the long run. On that note, from commondreams.org, grim news for the planet as Arctic sea ice hits record low again. From the report, the environment does not care about politics. Keep spewing greenhouse gases and face the consequences. End of headline. About this report, yes, incinerating over 100 million barrels of oil a day is absolutely a problem, a very big problem, as is burning over 26 million tons of coal every single day. Cutting down and burning forests, bad. Poisoning the oceans, bad. Paving the planet, bad. Climate engineering, worse than bad. None of this bodes well for the fate of the human race or life on Earth as a whole. And keep in mind, statistically, this doesn't mean centuries from now or decades. It means collapse is unfolding and accelerating now, kicking in the front door, so to speak. More headlines, more confirmation of exactly what Geoengineeringwatch.org has desperately tried to warn about for over a decade and a half. From AOL.com, global sea ice hits record February low amid warming trends. But what about the snow in New Orleans? Let's keep going. From the report, this is the third month in a row sea ice has set a new record. And for the record, they're referring to sea ice extent, aka the surface area, which even though official sources now consider ice pack to be any area of polar ocean with 15% slush or more to be, quote, ice pack, which is still 85% ocean, isn't it? The sea ice extent, in spite of all that, is still at record lows. And even worse, far worse, is the volume, aka the total mass of the sea ice, which has long since completely collapsed. Only sea surface chemical ice nucleation operations are temporarily and toxically masking the polar meltdowns, again, at the cost of making it all worse for the long run, not better. From Futurism.com, Antarctic Research Station in chaos. From the report, not only is Antarctic sea ice breaking apart and imploding, funding for monitoring is being gutted. Why do you think that is? because the powers that shouldn't be are now more desperate and dangerous than ever before to hide the planet's failing life support systems from public view until the moment of impact, and that now draws perilously near. So, the polar regions were melting down while there were never before recorded blizzards in New Orleans and Florida. And the Gulf Coast blizzards were then followed by record heat and fires, and more fires. Yeah, nothing to see here. Move along. From ABC News, evacuations ordered as 175 wildfires erupt across South and North Carolina. From the report, the governor of South Carolina declared a state of emergency. There were over 175 wildfires in the Carolinas this week. Please search this. Geoengineeringwatch.org, wildfires as a military weapon. What you will find is a 140-page U.S. military document, important sections highlighted, outlining specific pre-incineration operations that utilize climate modification technologies to establish the ground conditions that are most conducive to firestorm creation. Even more alarming, in this 140-page U.S. military document, 17 study sites were named within the borders of the continental U.S. Why? Who is ultimately in charge of the U.S. military machine? Those who print and control the money. Who else? Back to the fires. From MSN, red flag warnings active across central U.S. amid threat of, quote, extreme fire behavior. Another search on the fires. Geoengineeringwatch.org, wildfires serve geoengineering agenda. One of our most important short video reports. How many unprecedented incinerations will this year bring? Do you really want to know? Let's keep going. From the Anchorage Daily News, quote, an exceptional warning for Alaska, wildfire danger in early March in Alaska. A new national forecast predicts unusually high wildfire danger for the entire southern half of Alaska. State fire officials are urging extreme caution. The report then states, this is exceptional to have such a large swath of the state that is missing its winter snowpack this late into the winter season. Anchorage officially hit 0 inches of snow at the National Weather Service office. Stop there. No snow in Anchorage, Alaska in winter. Again, with blizzards in New Orleans and Florida. If this doesn't alarm you, it should. Next, on the other side of the Pacific, from ABC News, 2,000 firefighters deployed to fight Japan's worst wildfire in decades, likely their worst ever besides the bombing of innocent civilians in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. But Matrix Media always tries to make it seem like these events have happened sometime in the distant past so people don't panic. This report then states, as record-breaking snowfall has been recorded in Japan's northernmost island, the country is fighting its worst wildfires since the late 1800s with more than 2,000 self-defense force troops and firefighters deployed. Remember, the wildfires as a military weapon document I just mentioned. Keep that in mind. Search it. Examine it. From theconversation.com, fires used to terrify city residents. New research suggests climate change could see this fear return. Yes, fear, a core weapon of the controllers. Stop there. I'll continue to beat the drums on the following inarguable position to take regarding anything climate. There can be absolutely no legitimate discussion of the climate from any perspective without first and foremost acknowledging and addressing the climate engineering weather warfare elephant in the equation. Please remember that. Let's keep the focus on the biggest hole in the bottom of the boat. Don't allow anyone to divert your compass heading. Email a link of the dimming to media sources, weather agencies, elected officials, environmental groups, ag groups, parent-teacher groups. The list is endless. Start spot fires of awareness. Ask others to do the same. Only by reaching a critical mass of awareness do we have any chance of stopping the insanity in our skies from the inside out. Those that are participating in military circles and private defense contractors, suppliers, need to understand they are literally participating in their own near-term self-extermination and that of their posterity. Then we have a chance to stop these operations. Moving on. What else? Record heat roulette and chemical flash freeze roulette. Again, welcome to climate engineering, weather warfare, whack-a-mole. From Extreme Temps X. Arguably the most brutal heat event in world climatic history, anytime, anywhere. Unbelievable and mind-blowing. The report states 118 degrees Fahrenheit at Galinas in Mexico. That's 118 degrees Fahrenheit now. in the winter. Stop and think about that. Have you heard a single word about this shocking statistic from any Matrix media source? Well, they show non-stop footage of chemical snow zones. On that note, from extremetemperatures.com, from record heat to back in winter, Tokyo just had its warmest marathon in history, followed by snowflakes falling in the city. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And why are all the so-called weather forecasters doing nothing but towing the line, pretending that such extreme weather whiplash events are somehow normal when they're anything but? Criminal climate engineering cover-up actors. That's what the script-reading so-called forecasters are. And when populations are finally awakened to what's been done to them without their knowledge or consent, all those that participated in the criminal climate engineering cover-up will have some very serious explaining to do, won't they? About the cover-up, the following message was submitted to a geoengineeringwatch.org comment section. This is from Pedro. I've been using Zoom Hearth weather portal for a time until 28 of last February. This weather portal was providing detailed imagery for the geoengineering operations thanks to the geostationary Meadowstat 12 satellite and the superb live coverage with image detailed enough to see the criminal spraying operations in Europe and specifically for the Iberian Peninsula and Canary Islands 24 hours a day. But, Pedro says, on the 28th of February at 14:30 hours CET, the live coverage of the weather imagery suddenly stopped and all the live image information for Europe and Africa went black. He continues, in all the rest of the world, it was still possible to see the detailed, fine live images with the details of spraying operations, except for Europe and Africa. Now, 3 days later, the images provided by the Meadowstat 12 satellite all over the globe are completely gone, together with the panel controls related to this feature in the Zoom Hearth portal. Instead, the Zoom Hearth weather portal is now providing a blurry and pixelated imagery coming from an unknown satellite. This event just occurred after a full month of nonstop, atrocious spraying day after day on the skies over Spain and Portugal. Now, as far as I know, Pedro says it is impossible to find a detailed enough live imagery on the internet that shows live the criminal geoengineering operations that go on in the skies day after day. So no one can denounce and or record it. Yes, part of the plan of covering the tracks for the climate engineers. Next, a follow-up from my broadcast from last week in which I clarified the vast difference between localized small-scale weather modification programs and climate engineering operations. No, they're absolutely not the same. The following is a message from a scientist colleague and friend, Mark. Dane, he states, in relation to our conversation, I'd like to clarify a few points. I have to explain to friends and colleagues that cloud seeding is routinely carried out in the U.S. and many countries around the world, but is localized and nothing like the near-daily, near-global spraying operations, as you point out. Another crucial difference is that cloud seeding with silver iodide must be sprayed into existing clouds to cause rain or other precipitation, what is called tropospheric aerosol engineering. TAG acronym involves spraying material like coal fly ash as a base material into areas where clouds can form, thus virtually making clouds. In addition to being cheap and abundant, hundreds of millions of tons of coal fly ash is produced globally every single year, and the right-sized particles, nanoparticles, are in coal fly ash, which has the ability to make clouds, and clouds that can be manipulated by specific electromagnetic frequencies, which, for the record, are also very harmful. Mark continues, the powers that be have known this for a very long time, but only recently have these properties of CFA been documented in the scientific literature. Final statement from Mark. And again, he's a scientist, state scientist, recently retired, and a friend. Coal fly ash nucleates clouds and ice by pore condensation and freezing and has significant roles in cloud formation at cirrus level. It also plays a role in the mixed cloud layers below the coal fly ash particles injected at higher altitude are transported to lower altitudes after being exposed to lower temperatures above. Translation, when you see natural, beautiful, white, puffy, lower level cumulus clouds forming under a featureless, dirty, white overstory of climate engineering sprayed filth, welcome to Engineered Earth. You're listening to the weekly installment of Global Alert News, the Bad News Broadcast, installment number 500, March 8th, 2025. Number 500. 500 weeks in a row for the Global Alert News on-air radio broadcast, at times on as many as 28 stations around the country, all paid for out of pocket. No commercials, no politics. I've never missed a week. I will press on. I will do my best to sound the alarm for as long as I can. This is Dane Wigington, your host. Global Alert News is brought to you by Geoengineeringwatch.org, the largest and most visited website in the world on the subject of climate intervention operations, known as geoengineering. Global Alert News is aired on a number of AM/FM stations around the country. As I stated, if any radio station near you is willing to air the GAN broadcast in order to inform their listeners of what Matrix Media won't mention, have them contact us at admin@geoengineeringwatch.org. We will grant them access to our weekly broadcast for free, of course. Recordings of the commercial-free, non-political Global Alert News Hour can be found on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org under the recent column and on the Dane Wigington YouTube channel. If you're on our email list, please put us on your email contact book so that our mailouts don't go to the spam files. Please help us to share the groundbreaking documentary, The Dimming, which fully exposes the climate engineering atrocities, now approaching 26 million views on YouTube. The best way to share is by circulating the direct link to The Dimming by email directly from the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. Sharing directly helps us to overcome social media censorship. When viewing our YouTube of The Dimming or Global Alert News or any other Geoengineering Watch video on YouTube, please subscribe, share, and comment, all of which helps us to circulate critically important data to a much wider audience. How do we reach those that still aren't looking up? Here's one way. Start a conversation with Geoengineering Watch awareness-raising materials. They can be found on our homepage. Our only goal: provide activists what they need to move this fight forward. Extremely high-quality printed materials with shocking images. Again, we pass these on for less than our cost of producing and shipping. We have Geoengineering Watch hoodies and shirts. Photos of both are on our homepage. We have scannable business cards and bumper stickers, all effective tools to help strike up a conversation on the climate engineering issue. Reaching a critical mass. Again, only way forward in this fight. If we can expose it, we can stop it. If you're willing to share a picture of yourself with a Geoengineering Watch t-shirt or hoodie, ideally in some crowded location, please send your photo to us so that we can post it as part of our activist compilation, which is now part of our materials page. The images encourage others to make their voices heard in this all-important battle to sound the alarm. To all those that are steadfastly committed to exposing and halting the climate engineering onslaught, you will always have my deepest and most sincere gratitude. Team effort. Moving on. In addition to all the toxic climate engineering dispersed elements cited earlier in this broadcast, there are polymer nanoparticles, also a core component of the ongoing geoengineering operations. On that note, this ongoing and ever worsening theme from technologicalnetworks.com, microplastics found in bird lungs highlight widespread air pollution, and you know they're in our lungs. I've been over that week after week. The report continues with this. Researchers found an average of 221 plastic particles per bird species. The findings highlight concerns about inhaled microplastics in both wildlife and humans. They continue. Microscopic plastic pollutants drifting through the air are lodging in the lungs of birds. Researchers worldwide are increasingly alarmed by how pervasive these harmful particles are in the air humans breathe and the food they eat. High levels of microplastics have been linked to serious health conditions, including heart disease, cancer, respiratory problems, and fertility issues. Neurological diseases, Alzheimer's, ALS, all of it. As I've cited many times on many broadcasts, polymer and graphene nanoparticles are also used militarily as biological carrier platforms. What's that doing in our rain? This means to carry a pathogen from the clouds to the ground. As I've also cited many times, the world's second most recognized climate engineer, Dr. Ken Caldeira, has stated on the record that one of the tasks he performed for the US DoD was to design methods of spraying pathogens into clouds in order to affect the populations below. Question, does that include bird populations? Is all of this connected to the now constant parade of pandemics wreaking havoc on the ground, including bird flu? You decide. Quick detour for this footnote example of the collapsing web of life. From the California Water Impact Network, at least 100 native fish species in California are either in decline, headed towards extinction, or already extinct, representing 81% of California's highly distinctive inland fish fauna. That's just a snapshot, but you get the idea. Bugs, birds, bats, bears, fish, all are crashing across the board. Question, can humans survive without functional ecosystems? Short answer, no. Back to the wider horizon. How to ensure climate engineering remains hidden in plain sight? No pun intended. Just gut the system. From thefinancialtimes.com, climate scientists sound alarm as U.S. experts miss key UN meetings. From that report, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the world's leading climate science body, has been gathering this week in the eastern Chinese city of, I'm not going to pronounce that, to outline and budget for the seventh iteration of its landmark report. The absence of U.S. federal scientists has cast a shadow on the meeting. First, for the record, I have nothing but disdain for the so-called climate science community, especially the IPCC, the largest scientific panel ever created on any subject in human history. Their blatant denial of climate engineering is nothing short of criminal. This being said, now that the U.S. part of this panel is being thrown under the bus by the very hand that once fed them, will some find their courage? And if so, they need to stand up together as one and tell the truth about what's taking place in our skies while it can still make a difference, which means now. Tomorrow will be too late. And about the thrown under the bus part from MSN, hundreds of weather forecasters fired in latest wave of Doge cuts. Let's add this from ABC News. Yes, NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, adjusts its historical weather data. Why are they doing that now? The agency says adjusting weather data ensures consistency of climate records. Question, consistency of climate records or climate engineering cover-up? Second question, are cover-ups easier to carry out when there's not so many around to take notice? You decide. From cleantechnica.com, U.S. Cultural Revolution bonfire of NASA, NOAA, EPA, CDC, and USDA climate programs. Both the 2025 Trump administration attacks on scientific funding and research freedoms and the Cultural Revolution, referring to the Chinese so-called Cultural Revolution, share a common thread, the report states, of ideological interference in academia, though they differ in severity and execution. The report continues, during the Cultural Revolution, scientists and intellectuals were violently persecuted, universities were shut down, and research was labeled as counter-revolutionary, leading to a complete halt in scientific progress. In contrast, the Trump administration cuts to NASA and NOAA and other research institutions so far represent a more bureaucratic form of suppression, targeting funding and dismantling programs rather than physically persecuting scientists. However, the report continues, both cases reflect a distrust of intellectualism, a prioritization of political loyalty over expertise, and long-term damage to national scientific progress. Let's stop there. Again, I have absolutely no love for the power structure program science community and their criminal cover-up of countless dire issues, including climate engineering. But there's still this question. In regard to the climate, is all this just cost-cutting or a form of covert climate engineering cover-up? Yes, the government, climate science communities have so far shown zero courage in regard to telling the truth on many fronts. But now, with all these cuts, data essential for researchers in the private sector is also being deleted. That's a cover-up. Moving along, how many know this? From AOL.com, there were just 6 tropical storms in the southern hemisphere. That's at the same time. Australia and other locations are being pounded. U.S. matrix media is silent. Just more political theater from them, or some larger manufactured distraction if needed. About the toll that all this is taking on the planet's food-producing ability. Next, the title of a new science study, World's Critical Food Crops at Imminent Risk from Rising Temperatures. Report states global food security could be notably impacted by marked decline in crop diversity if temperatures rise by more than 1.5 C. They're talking about from pre-industrial baselines. Too late for that. Based on unfiltered frontline data, it appears we're past 3.5 C right now. And for the record, that is the level at which many scientists believe the human race is functionally extinct. It means that the cascading collapse of Earth's life support systems will lead to the inevitable extinction of our species in the very near term. We're past that threshold. Let's hope they're wrong. The report states about half the world's food crop production may be affected. No could, may, might. More than half already affected right now. Scorching UVC, toxic rain, sterilized soils, not just temperatures. And by the way, for those that don't know, photosynthesis stops at 104 degrees, and it slows way down long before reaching that point. And there is, of course, the unfolding functional collapse of Earth's life-giving ozone layer. Climate engineering is the core causal factor. This is a near-term existential threat all by itself. Search and review the ozone destruction section on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org to learn what most don't want to know, even if they can feel the sun scorching their skin. More not-so-fun facts. Scientists discover unexpected decline in global ocean evaporation amid rising sea temperatures from that report. Despite rising sea surface temperatures, global ocean evaporation has decreased over the past decade. Observations since the early 2000s have revealed a puzzling slowdown in the growth of global water vapor, prompting scientists to re-examine how ocean evaporation responds to rising temperatures. This is an objective of the climate engineers to thwart the hydrological cycle. The report then says this contradicts what we would typically expect in a warming world. It contradicts the laws of physics. Let's make that clear. The atmosphere carries 7% more moisture for every degree C of warming. We're likely past 3.5 C. We should have much more overall atmospheric water vapor, but we don't. And why don't we? Because there's a factor we're not being told about. That factor is climate engineering. The report then says the researchers identified a key factor behind this unexpected trend, a decline in wind speed, a phenomenon known as wind stilling. They continue, the recent decline in ocean evaporation should not necessarily be interpreted as evidence of a weakened hydrological cycle, as it may instead reflect natural climate oscillations. There is nothing whatsoever natural about what's happening. Again, this argument, it would be like running someone over in a crosswalk, beating them, shooting them, stabbing them, burning them, then claim they died of a heart attack. Just natural. Wouldn't make that argument in court. Let's stop there. Of course, they don't want us to think that the havoc in the hydrological cycle is a direct result of climate engineering operations. Of course, tens of millions of tons of aerosols sprayed into our skies annually aren't mentioned. Endothermic chemical nutrients, an ionosphere heater, Doppler radar evaporating moisture impacts. The list goes on and on. Just global stilling, they say, which for the record is also a direct result of climate engineering operations impacting surface convection. So, sprayed skies, nanoparticles settling to and coating sea surfaces, microwaving the atmosphere, all core contributors to a totally derailed global hydrological cycle. Got water? And if so, for how much longer? Let's keep going. From ecowatch.com, glacial melting is accelerating, driving sea level rise and depleting fresh water. About sea level rise, if you're in Miami especially, they're spending about $1 billion a year right now just trying to keep the streets dry. How long does anyone think that can continue? More on crop loss. The data keeps coming. From marketintel.com, hurricanes, heat, and hardship, counting 2024's crop losses. Control the weather, control the world. But from another perspective, who cares about collapsing ecosystems? Just sell the proverbial farm and pump up the bank account. I'll get to that theme in a moment, but first, two footnotes from all mainstream Matrix media sources. Trump says golden age of America has only just begun in speech to Congress this week. Remember that quote in the coming weeks and months. And when that time comes, ask yourself if there was even a shred of truth in it. Similar theme from the dailyhold.com. U.S. household debt shatters 18 trillion mark. Wow, that sounds bad. But sooner than almost any dare to imagine, none of it will matter. Here's the bottom line. Biosphere collapse, followed by economic collapse, followed by civilization collapse. And we're already in the Thelma and Louise moment. Hang on. Next stop, bottom of the canyon. What plans are being executed in order to mask what's coming for some until the moment of impact? So about that robbing Peter to pay Paul part, if you've heard that saying before, From AmericanProgress.org, Trump quietly plans to liquidate public lands to finance his sovereign wealth fund. The report states, given that the United States is roughly $36 trillion in debt, which is on top of the household debt, experts question where the money would come from. The Trump administration seems to be signaling that selling out and selling off the nation's public lands to the highest bidder might provide the necessary funding. An SWF, Sovereign Wealth Fund, is a state-owned investment fund made up of money generated by the government, often derived from a nation's natural resource revenues. Doug Burgum, President Trump's Secretary of the Interior, explained that the nation's parks, public lands, and natural resources, including timber, carbon fuels, and minerals, are assets on the nation's balance sheet, end quote. Burgum speculated in his confirmation hearing that federal lands could be worth as much as $200 trillion. He argued that the U.S. government, run like a business, should know the value of the corporation's assets and use those assets to, quote, get a return for the American people. Right. Even if it destroys the planet's last remaining life support systems. The report from American Progress continues. Under Trump's proposal, the value of public lands would be determined by the potential market value to grow an SWF, Sovereign Wealth Fund, and not by their value to hunters and fishermen, family, ranchers, communities, or anyone else that relies on clean water and air, as well as jobs and income that come from natural resource development, recreation, and tourism. Stop. No need to worry about the clean water and air part. There isn't any of either right now. And the contamination worsens by the day as climate engineering operations are being further ramped up, not curtailed. No surprise. More from the report. Land sell-off and the privatization of lands to this extent would deprive Americans and local economies of the access to natural resources that sustain them. Giving money managers and financiers control over land management is more than just a land grab. So that's what's making America great again? And the, quote, golden age of America is all about? Now it makes sense. And for the record, due criticism of any political actor is an endorsement of another. Just two sides of the same coin. All bad. Big club, and we're not in it, as Carlin stated so clearly. The American Progress Report then states, once an SWF, Sovereign Wealth Fund, has accumulated wealth, that wealth is invested back in stocks, bonds, real estate, and other financial instruments to earn even more money. They hope until the Ponzi scheme stock market house of cards crashes. Yeah, what a great idea. Sell off America's last remaining natural resources so they can be looted, plundered, pillaged, and polluted until nothing left, and invested in the stock market. Brilliant. Final excerpt from the report. Without proper sideboards between politicians and investment decisions, the SWF, Sovereign Wealth Fund, would likely serve to enrich Trump and his allies, not the American public. Wow, that definitely doesn't sound like a happy ending. Now add biosphere collapse. Not good at all. Let's add this from NBC News. Fired Yosemite workers say upside-down U.S. flag was a call to protect public lands. They say they fear national parks and forests will be privatized and exploited for their natural resources. Yep, exactly. More, same theme from the UK Guardian. Trump orders swaths of U.S. forests to be cut down for timber. From that report, President's move to expand tree cutting across 280 million acres evades rules to protect endangered species. Trump has instructed U.S. Forest Service and Bureau of Land Management to increase logging targets and for officials to circumvent the U.S.'s Endangered Species Act by using unspecified emergency powers to ignore protections placed upon vulnerable creatures' habitats. The Trump executive order is the most blatant attempt in American history by a president to hand over federal public lands to the logging industry. The executive order is built on a lie, as Trump falsely claims that more logging will curb wildfires and protect communities, while the overwhelming weight of hard evidence shows exactly the opposite. The amount of logging, the report states, in national forests also surged under Biden amid a rush of tree falling ahead of expected restrictions on old-growth cutting. No surprise there. Meet the new boss, same as the old boss. Biden, under pressure from Republicans and the timber industry, halted the old-growth protection plan. The Trump administration's goal isn't to preserve our national forests, but to sell them off to billionaires and corporate polluters. Exactly. And anyone who buys the lie that forests are incinerating all over the world because we aren't cutting down enough trees has their eyes wide shut. and knows absolutely nothing about the climate engineering issue, please search and review the Engineering Wildfires section on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. Please search the Into the Wild section on geoengineeringwatch.org, and you will see me in the forest firsthand exposing their total collapse. Largest single factor, climate engineering. Please search geoengineeringwatch.org. Climate Engineering and the Dying of the Trees, another important video report from Geoengineering Watch. From grist.org, questions and confusion as Trump pauses key funding for shrinking Colorado River. The report then states halted funding threatens the sustainability of the entire system. And the same is true with drought. As a direct result of climate engineering, which is inducing drought, please search the Engineering Drought section on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. We have been sounding the alarm about this for so very many years. Geoengineering is much more effective at inducing drought than inducing deluge. Moving on from the New York Times, how Trump has undermined U.S. climate policy. Trump has gutted federal climate efforts, rolled back regulations aimed at limiting pollution, and given a major boost to the carbon fuel industry. What a surprise. Climate engineering certainly hasn't been rolled back. I can say that definitively. And anyway, after all, it takes a lot of jet fuel to keep those geoengineering jet tankers flying, doesn't it? Thus the benefits to the carbon fuel industry. Got to keep them happy. From levernews.com, the plan to make America hazardous again. The Trump EPA could stop states from warning people about potentially dangerous chemicals sprayed on their food. The report then states Trump's environmental regulators are advancing a proposal to block states from warning their consumers about pesticides in their food, according to federal documents just reviewed. So much for MAHA. All the smoke and mirrors. Should that come as any surprise? Moving on, biosphere collapse. First from MSN, scientists' stunning observation of hybrid growler bear sparks concern, ill-suited to adapt, the report states. Let's summarize that. For those that have never heard this term, a growler bear is a hybrid between a grizzly and a polar bear. It's occurring due to ecological collapse and the loss of sea ice, and these poor creatures are not adapted to survive. All of it absolutely breaks my heart. More from ABC News. Sea turtles return to the Atlantic Ocean off Florida after being stunned by the cold. The report continues, there are so many turtles that were affected by that cold, stunning event. The frigid temperatures reached South Florida. Turtle facilities around the state have reached capacity. So, how in the world do you end up with cold, stunted turtles with superheating seas? Temporary and toxic sea surface ice nucleation elements is how. And in the coming months, will Florida sea temperatures rocket back to the 102 degrees that have already hit that state only a year ago, killing everything in the region? With all that in mind, flash hypothermia for sea turtles. This from Yahoo News. Scientists sound the alarm after staggering change in world's oceans creates surprising consequences. The world's oceans hit their highest temperatures ever recorded in 2024, and the trend continues. Next report from SherwoodNews.com. Hot water. Global ocean temperatures are hitting new highs again. From that report, off the back of the hottest year on record, climate indicators are already climbing to new highs. Alarming ocean temperatures seen throughout last year have continued to surge in January and February. Looking forward, the overall warming trend is virtually certain to continue accelerating, and that does not bode well for life on Earth, I assure you. Search Canfield Ocean. Let's keep going. From MSN, scientists sound alarm after collecting unprecedented data from world's oceans. The broken records have become a broken record. The upper 2,000 meters of ocean gained 16 zettajoules of heat from 2023 to 2024, and that's about 140 times the world's total electricity output in 2023. Water vapor is also a powerful greenhouse gas, and increasing heating leads to drying and risk of drought. Geoengineering does that more than anything, because with that heating, there should be more evaporation. As I already covered in this broadcast, there's not more evaporation over the oceans, and scientists are perplexed about it because they won't admit to climate engineering. At home, this report states, you can help cool the oceans by installing energy-efficient appliances and LED lights. Really? We're expected to believe that that's all it takes to fix a completely broken, thrashed planet. Denial and delusion rule the day. Watch the documentary Planet of the Humans for the rundown on how non-renewable, so-called renewable energy actually is. And no, there is no magic solution. Too many people want that, and if you don't have that, they don't want to hear another word of it. They want to ram their head in the sand, and that's not going to save us. There's more. From the UN Climate Action Site, a warming of 1.5 degrees C threatens to destroy 70 to 90% of coral reefs, and a 2% sea increase means a nearly 100% loss. Unfortunately, based on unfiltered frontline temperature data, we're likely past 3.5 degrees C of warming over pre-industrial baselines right now. Not good. So where does that leave us? Dead reefs, dead kelp forests, collapsing fisheries around the world. In short, again, Canfield Ocean. Look it up. So back to the flash hypothermia sea turtles. Chemical ice nucleation operations can and do temporarily and toxically flash cool sea surface temperatures, a bit like the New Orleans flash blizzard. Absolutely evil. All of it. As this is my 500th without fail weekly report, please forgive me for ranting just a bit longer. The next few minutes were not aired on live radio, which is limited to 55 minutes. 2 more reports, then I'll summarize. From Lucid Substack, states of emergency, a favorite autocratic tool. Yes, it is. They stage emergencies and don't tell the public about the real ones, like the collapsing biosphere. Report states autocrats love states of emergency, often declared in the wake of some real or invented crisis. States of emergency that give leaders expanded powers, letting them do things they've wanted to do anyway, like crack down on the opposition, purge their parties and parliaments, or attempt a coup to maintain their power. The other crisis is a so-called national energy emergency, which was part of a suite of actions decreed on day one of the new administration to unleash American energy production and mineral sourcing by freeing it from the structures of state, federal, and international climate regulations. Who cares if the planet's life support systems are completely imploding, right? It's truly a global circus of insanity. And all the while, Matrix Media perpetually pushes power structure propaganda. On that note from the UK Guardian, technofossils, how humanity's eternal testament will be plastic bags, cheap clothes, and chicken bones. From that report, all of the stuff made by humans by 1950 was a small fraction of the mass of all the living matter on Earth. But today, it outweighs all plants, animals, and microbes and is set to triple by 2040. Not to worry about the 2040 date. On the current course, we won't make 2030. The collective dysfunction has spawned an extremely discontented and extraordinarily violent so-called civilization that has long since become an existential threat, not only to itself, but to all life on Earth. A Native American quote, "Their eyes have a staring expression. They are always seeking something. What are they seeking? The whites always want something. They are always uneasy and restless. We do not know what they want. We do not understand them. We think that they are mad." End quote. The entire construct of the Matrix, industrialized, militarized, so-called civilization, is a system of taking, often at the point of a gun, from populations and countries who possess the remaining resources that empires need to sustain their cancerous hubris just a bit longer, until nothing is left. The Matrix doesn't contribute to the whole, to the web of life, on which all of our lives completely and totally depend. About knee-jerk terms that are so quickly belched out by so many without conscious thought, alarmist and or alarmism. Question, when is it absolutely rational and reasonable to become alarmed? When the planet is completely poisoned, dysfunctional, and dead? For the record, that destination is already all too visible on the near-term horizon. More terms that are much more applicable at this late hour, which unfortunately is still dominated by total apathy. Denialism. Yes, this is a condition that far too many are doubling down on, it seems, till the moment of impact. Fact, there is something seriously wrong with far too many in the ranks of the human race. A propensity to ram their heads into the sand as far as humanly possible until they can't. And that moment draws so very near. The brutally bitter reality that so few are yet willing to face is this. We, each of us, all of us, are passengers on a rapidly sinking ship that is surrounded by an endless sea of space, incomprehensible darkness. False flag events, pathogen releases, global conflict, and weather warfare. Just some of the cards held by the manipulators of the Matrix. Geoengineeringwatch.org has desperately warned about all of it for over a decade and a half. I began to sound the alarm on my own in 1998. 27 years passed. From Scientific American, why the news feels overwhelming and how to cope. Question, do you think Sci American is actually going to provide any truly valid coping advice? No, they don't. They just want you to know that they know how bad you feel. Not that they care, because they don't. So, how do we cope? How can we? When I was 14, I came across the philosophy of the Stoics. It altered the course of my life, and every time I found I had taken an incorrect off-ramp, these timeless teachings were core in correcting my compass heading. From Epictetus almost 2,000 years ago, this quote, "He for whom neither pleasure, nor pain, nor fame, nor riches can get the better, and he who is able whenever he thinks fit to abandon his whole body with contempt, and thus depart with ease, whose slave can he ever be? To whom is such a man subject? None." Epictetus also stated this, "It would be better to die 1,000 deaths than to desert the post at which God has placed you." For a short time during the year 2001, I kept a brief record of my pondering in a journal. The following is my entry from 10/10/2001, nearly 24 years ago. The power to protect or destroy the planet. Who but man has this ability or responsibility? If indeed this awesome and ominous power rests on us all, can any of us honestly, after taking a realistic look at the wider horizon, say with any conviction whatsoever that we are on the correct course? Would a slower and more indirect course of ruin in the end be any better than the now obvious and immediate trajectory of self-annihilation we're currently on? Would our failure as a species be any less on the former path as opposed to the latter? I think not. Days later, from 10/13/2001, I penned these words. Again and again, I bring myself back to the question of purpose. I intentionally interrogate myself during each task I perform throughout the day. Am I spending my time and energy with purpose that will somehow, or at some point, benefit the whole? It has been said that circumstances do not make the man. They merely reveal him to himself. Regardless of our individual circumstances, each of us, all of us, have our assigned posts. No matter how dark the horizon, our only responsibility is to do our best to man our posts, no matter what comes. We can absolutely do that. All of us can. To do our best, to do our part. And if enough of us hold to this heading, we may yet accomplish more than we imagine possible. Never give up, ever. When I first moved to the wilderness of Northern California, it was teeming with life. Commonly, there were bears in my front yard and my backyard. Flocks of turkeys, singing, jays, so much life. And now, so much silence. So many times in years past, I would trek solo far into the trailless wilderness, crossing the Pitt River in a canoe I keep hidden in the forest. I would shoulder my pack and make the grueling climb over ridges and through canyons to the top of a jagged limestone string of peaks. There were so many bears in this untraveled expanse of forest that it looked like bear freeways going every direction. Often I would stumble upon my furry friends, and if I was downwind and quiet, I could observe them for an extended time. Black bears actually come in numerous shades. Such diversity, such a spiritual creature they are. Upon making the summit of the peaks, about 7 straight hours of arduous climbing, I felt 1,000,000 miles from the insanity, 1,000,000 miles from anyone, the deepest form of solitude. I would sometimes sit for half the night at the summit of the highest peak, gazing alone at the heavens, wondering why. Why was the world the way it was and the way it is? When bedding down for the night, I would tuck into a fissure in the limestone and block the entrance with dead pine branches. And more than once, this gave me notice of a curious bear. But I've never felt in danger. They've never threatened me. They're my friends. And they know why I am here. The ongoing battle to halt climate engineering has kept me from making this favorite trek for far too long, but there's no choice for me now. A battle must be fought, and every day counts. We are here for a reason. It is not an accident of fate. All that is asked of us is to rise to the occasion as best as we can, to do our best, to do our part. And if we do, who can say or who can know what allies we may yet have that may also rise to the occasion? We are not alone in this battle. Who can say or know how much good we can yet accomplish if we only try? There's only one way to find out. Make your voice heard at the top of your lungs while you still can. Exposing and halting the climate engineering weather warfare assault is the first and most important leap we can collectively make in the right direction. We must free the planet from the geoengineering chains and stop the contamination of every breath we take. Check the activist suggestions link on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org for specific instructions on how you can help to move this fight forward. Please, please, make every single day count. Never give up, ever. Until next week, this is Dane Wigington from geoengineeringwatch.org.